A University of Wisconsin study says that canceling sports in school will have serious mental health issues. What's a little suicide and self-mutilation if we can get Trump stopped from a second term? I'm Dr. Duke, she's Katie, and this is the Dr. Duke Show. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Dr. Duke Show, the only program that keeps you educated on the craziness impacting K-12 classrooms and college campuses around the world. Today, we start with a UW-Madison health study that finds a disturbing number of kids have experienced feelings of COVID depression, we call it now, due to schools being shut down and their sports and extracurricular programs canceled. Well, and this is really not surprising. One of the hallmarks of the new leftism, it seems to me, this intolerant new leftist shift, is we're no longer allowed to employ our critical thinking. Whichever is the most politically correct, the most emotionally moving answer to a problem has to be the only one we push. So on the one hand, you're right, I saw a survey out that about 65% of Americans would be okay with fining and imprisoning people who don't wear masks. And so the really moving story now is COVID. We can't send these kids back to school, even though the likelihood of them getting infected is extremely low. The dangers from the virus for them is extremely low too. And we don't even have a lot of evidence that little children, are really good at promoting or spreading the disease. None of that matters. That COVID is going to force us. The teachers are in a panic. The unions want no part of this. Again, as I said in the intro, the fact that Donald Trump is suffering, his poll numbers are suffering because of this, because you've convinced American moms, right, that, oh my God, my little darling is going to get sick and die if I send him to school. This is where we are now. Critical thinking is dead. Pointing out the other side of this, Katie, that there are huge repercussions to kids. Things that they wouldn't suffer under COVID, that they will suffer from isolation, from not being able to participate in what school used to be, the shock, the trauma of all of this, canceling all of those curricular activities is going to have a huge context and a huge problem for those kids. But hey, and if UW-Madison's telling you this, you better realize that it's not a made-up story. It doesn't fit their narrative either.
Well, the study was a research study led by Dr. Tim McQuinn. He's a UW Health researcher and a member of the WIAA Sports Medical Advisory Committee. So he actually surveyed kids who were in 71 of all 72 counties across the entire state. And he found that basically regarding the feelings, the emotions, the responses of, what's been happening, you high school students, with your sports being shut down, it's significantly increased the level of, anxiety, depression. These kids are being basically revealing that because of their school and their sports being canceled, their anxiety levels have gone up. There were more than 3,000 participants, and 65% of them reported anxiety symptoms. 25% of them say it was moderate or severe anxiety.
Yeah, absolutely. And the number of suicides is spiking. What's going on here is really tragic, but we can't even really have a serious conversation about it. You remember when, within the last, year, we've heard nothing more, last 6 months, we've heard how whatever the CDC says we got to do. And Trump is a monster for ignoring the CDC. Well, the CDC, Center for Disease Control, came out last week and sided with Donald Trump, believe it or not, sided with Donald Trump and said kids belong back in school. Has that gotten any traction? Have you seen that reported much in the news? Do we have finger-wagging Faucis out there telling us you better do what the CDC says? CDC says no. We're saying none of that. And this country right now is really in a terrible place. We are in the grip of a kind of radical progressivism that is almost 99% emotion. It's geared to emotion. It's geared to play on your feelings. It's geared to scare you and make you hunker down and hide, refuse to engage challenges, to let somebody else take care of it. It really is a shocking thing.
And what's happening then with especially all of our athletes here, they reported that in May, physical activity was down 50%. And I actually think that's a low number. I would say physical activity was probably down even lower than that. The physical health score that they had was decreased from 91.7 to 82.6, and the psychosocial health decreased from 90.4 to 76.2, with an overall health decreasing from 90.9 to 78.4.
And the real children here are the teachers and the teachers' unions. I'm sorry, and the progressives who abet them, the progressive infrastructure of all of this. This is just rank cowardice. I mean, there was a time when and I've said this in other shows that we've done, when we educated kids through World War II, we educated kids through the Cold War, we educated kids through hurricanes, we've educated kids through all sorts of social stresses. They were studying in England, they were doing their lessons while the bombs were raining down. That's what you used to do. You don't shut off every aspect of human life because there may be a virus out there that's going to kill a relatively very small percentage of the population. To engage in this kind of mass surrender on the American part of the American people. And you see that clip of the woman, like an 80-year-old woman at a dog park in California? You had just over the last couple of days, you had at a dog park, you had a family. They were sitting there with their dog. They were away from everybody else. They were having a little picnic right at the dog park when this woman, 80 years old, comes out and pepper sprays them. Shoots them all with pepper spray because they had the temerity not to be wearing masks. This kind of craziness does not bode well to the future of anything like a country that's dedicated to liberty.
And if we would go back in time to when we just first decided, hey, schools should be shut down, we should send the kids home, it's the exact opposite of what they're doing now, because they said, no, our kids can't go home because at home is where it's dangerous. At home it's where they, have abuse. At home it's where they're going to lose their education. At home it's all these things, and it's going to be bad for them. The kids need to be in school, but we've completely reversed that. But my main point of this whole thing that I would like to acknowledge and address the American public is the fact that every year in America, 300,000 people die due to obesity. So you're not letting these kids go and play sports, run around, be healthy because COVID may hit them.
The final thought I have about this is that there are now a lot of substantive people with really great credentials who are saying that the initial lockdown didn't fix anything. Didn't change anything, didn't save anybody's life. And yet here we are back to it again. And when that gross picture we saw of Fauci throwing out the first pitch and then sitting in an empty stadium with his mask off, right, talking to his friends.
This is what happens when you don't participate in high school sports. You look like Dr. Anthony Fauci trying to throw a baseball.
Well, you're generous. You could have said you could look like me. I'll take it. Moving forward.
Now, have you ever watched the show Doctor Who?
I never have watched Doctor Who.
Well, Doctor Who is a lovely British show. And
time traveler guy?
Yep, time traveler. Well, the one of the best episodes is called Don't Blink, because otherwise statues will come get you. Well, you're not allowed to blink if you are part of Marymount Manhattan College in New York, where a professor named Marcia Simon, she's a professor who's been there for almost 30 years. Now, she had to attend this anti-racism and social justice video conference for the university. And as you can see in the photo, it looks like she may have her eyes closed, be sleeping. If I was on a video conference that had anti-racism, I might be doing the same thing. But she says she wasn't sleeping. First off, of course, they're calling for her head because they say she's sleeping. But she said she was not sleeping during this video conference, and she says, I was not asleep as is implied at any point during the meeting. The photo used was taken without permission when I was looking down or briefly resting my Zoom-weary eyes with my head tilted back, which I must do in order to see my computer screen through my trifocal progressive lenses. I listened with my ears and heard the entire meeting. But no, because they took that photo, now the students and everyone want her gone.
And this is the students. You had a bunch of idiot students who are celebrating the fact that faculty and faculty resources are devoted to yet another online warning about racism. I mean, with all due respect, no respect due to you. These endless seminars on race do nothing but make it worse, right? All you're doing is dredging up. The common sense aspects of this have been long since gone. All you're doing now is you're scapegoating, you're calling out certain groups, you're shaming people into conforming to what you think racism is, which is now everything that the students don't like. And so at this stupid online presentation, I mean, I hope she did fall asleep. If she did fall asleep, so what? The fact that she has to defend herself in this kind of a lengthy non-apology before she even gets to the point where she says that I'm sorry if anyone was offended is ridiculous. What have we turned children into? And the story we just saw Young people now are the victims of what these radical progressive adults are forcing them not to do. And here you have a situation where radicalized college kids have determined that they are going to be worse than what we saw in the Gestapo or the Soviet Stasi, right? What you've got going on here is a situation where 18-year-olds now are scanning every aspect of this woke, politically correct culture. It's not enough for you to agree. It's not enough for you to have the same ideas. You better be alert when they're talking about racism. You have to have a sympathetic look on your face. You should be crying. If you're not doing that, we're going to fire you for insensitivity.
Silence is violence. Well, the petition that these students put out got almost 2,000 signatures, and it calls for the administrators to fire her. And they claim that this is a pattern of disrespect towards students. The petition says...
Pattern. A pattern of disrespect?
Mm-hmm. Okay. The petition says, this is a petition that is demanding the removal of a faculty member who does not align with the anti-racist views and actions that were promised to be adopted by the department earlier this week at the town hall meetings. It's been brought to the attention of the students that Patricia Simon was sleeping during the town hall meeting that took place at the end of June. This action has only capitalized on a pattern of negligence and disrespect that Patricia Simon has exhibited over and over again in her time as an associate professor and coordinator of the BFA musical theater program. Because, oh my gosh, apparently in musical theater, she's just racist out there for nearly 30 years.
Here's one of the complaints, that this professor enables the racist and sizist actions of the words of the vocal coaches under her jurisdiction. So in other words, there's a fatty there who feels like he or she's being discriminated against. As a member of that particular tribe, I would say to you, stop eating vanilla wafers and shut up, would be my response to this student.
First off, it's Nilla wafers.
Nilla.
And sizes could be referring to me, someone who's just a little smaller.
Oh, yes. Not just fat, it could be shrimpy. Did I just offend you?
No.
Am I just insensitive?
No, it's just, that's a lame comeback. Shrimpy,
right. I mean, this whole thing now it's so overwrought. This really is like the kind of thing you would see in the Soviet Union. This is the kind of thing where you are finding reasons to out somebody else. Not because they're guilty, because that virtue signaling gets you a pat on the head from the authorities. If you could sell out your neighbor, you could at least sleep well that night, at least for one night, knowing that you have shown your loyalty to the forces that be by destroying somebody else's life. If you're smart, you'll realize sooner or later they're going to come for you too. But again, when did kids get this kind of power over how institutions like universities run? To give a 19, 20-year-old who only has had a couple of freshman seminars with wacko liberal professors, to give them this kind of cancel power, to give them this kind of cultural clout, it doesn't. You would not do it in any other way. There's no other societal way that you would give spoiled children this kind of power of life and death. It's like that episode of The Twilight Zone, you remember? When little Billy Mooney, he had this power. He's a little boy, like 7 years old, but he had the power to kill people with his mind. And so everybody was being really nice to him, right? They were flattering him. And the more spoiled and selfish and dangerous he got, the more the adults back. But that's when you could be actually killed by Billy Mummy. I guess you can actually be killed here by idiot university administrators who might just at some point fire somebody for falling asleep.
Did you know the Chinese calendar says that 2020 is the year of the petition? Because that's all we're getting. More petitions at Georgetown University, where students started a petition, a whole 348 signatories, are demanding the school become a sanctuary campus for protesters. And choice of words is intentional for Georgetown being a sanctuary. Now it began, Black Lives Matter. That's how they start their entire thing. Black Lives Matter. And protesters have a right to peacefully fight for justice. In agreement with a similar petition from Georgetown faculty, the Corps, and GUSA, as institutions built to care for and protect student needs, and with the signatories, urged the university to establish Georgetown's main and downtown campuses as sanctuary spaces, open to protesters and closed to external police or security forces. In doing so, Georgetown would be continuing its own tradition of care for the neighbor and whole person.
Who in the world is attacking Black Lives Matter's right to peaceful protest? Who's doing that? In fact, so bad is it that we've we've now defined peaceful protesting. The protesters themselves have defined peaceful protesting as throwing rocks and Molotov cocktails and arson and beating people well nigh to death and hijacking cars and shooting lasers into the eyes of federal employees. That's how they. Now, this is what I'd like to ask these 348 morons. What do you mean by peaceful protest? And why do you need it at Georgetown when no one is offering the slightest resistance to these people protesting peacefully? It doesn't make any sense. But that shows how far down Alice's rabbit hole we are, right? In the sense that whatever Black Lives Matter does is now considered peaceful. However they go about their business, it's peaceful. And you look at these Democrat mayors who are the purveyors of this in these big cities, right? That these aren't violent protesters. It's the federal agents who are here to stop, who are impinging upon these peaceful protests. They're the ones who've made it violent. Even though there is no evidence of that, and all the evidence of the smoldering ruins that once was Portland, right, points to exactly the opposite. But isn't it funny? There's a correlation between those big Democrat states, speaking of sanctuary, as sanctuary cities, right? Where you can be there illegally, where you can be there. We'll welcome you. We'll give you a driver's license. We'll give you benefits in places like San Francisco. Just show up. And so now they want to turn college campuses, which the irony is they are already sanctuary campuses.
No.
Is there anybody at Georgetown who would stop them from protesting peacefully? Anybody?
No, probably
Straw
not. But here's the deal. The Student Association Senate had to meet and put out a resolution because they needed to speak, truth to power. They unanimously passed a resolution saying that Georgetown should adhere to the demands of the petition.
Of course they should.
Because they sponsored it as well. The resolution states that a sanctuary campus is needed because students of color feel uncomfortable and unsafe around police forces, and they often have a fear of retaliation or intimidation.
I love the way white people speak so definitively of what black people think. Right? We as white people know that African Americans are childish and can't deal with law enforcement. Right? That every African American in this country, whenever they see a cop, they start shivering, they start sweating, their hearts begin to palpitate to the point of blowing up, because we're white people and we understand this.
Yeah, but when you say that, isn't that also the argument, but you apply it to why it's racist, like that white people, anytime they're around black people, that's what they say happens, but now it's to the police.
All white people are afraid of black people, and all black people are afraid of cops. It's like a syllogism. All black people are afraid of cops. All white people are afraid of blacks. Therefore black cops are the only thing that. Therefore, black cops just would scare everybody.
Would scare everyone.
I guess would be the way you have to do it.
Well, the petition with the 348 signatories ends with the paragraph stating, as an institution historically contributing to the brutality of slavery in a city shaped by a large African American population, and as the first Jesuit university in the nation, Georgetown should lead by example and become a sanctuary for those fighting for racial justice. We urge Georgetown to act and ethically establish its campus as a sanctuary, free from the real and anticipated violence of external police.
I hope it happens, and I hope Black Lives Matter take up residence on your campus, Georgetown. I hope they occupy your buildings. I hope they steal your students' food. You're going to love this, right? I think you should not just make them a sanctuary city. You should dedicate one of your Georgetown buildings to operations, as an operation command center for Black Lives Matter kids to go out and protest in the rest of the committee. Do it. And tell you what, raise tuition, double your tuition, and let the white kids double your tuition for the white kids and make them pay for this extra. All these student government people who think it's about time that the first Jesuit institution, one that has a terrible history of racism, ought to pay for it. Well, let's pass it on to you kids. Let's start charging $80,000, $100,000 a year to go to Georgetown, and all that extra money paid by white students can go to set up this beautiful sanctuary in the middle of Georgetown's campus. That's a college that needs to go away anyway.
It's time for some real education. French Impressionist Claude Monet painted Water Lilies, a series of almost 250 oil paintings that depict his flower garden at his home in Giverny. This project was the main focus of his art over the last 30 years of his life. Many of the paintings were painted while Monet suffered from cataracts. During the 1920s, France built a pair of oval rooms at the Musée de l'Orangerie as a permanent home for 8 water lily murals by Monet. The exhibit opened to the public on May 16, 1927, a few months after Monet's death.
Yes, and I want to give a shout out to Michelle Lamont. Michelle Lamont, she's the one who asked that we would do something on Monet, which is always a joy for me. The Impressionists are pretty remarkable, and you could make a really strong case that Monet is the absolute leader of the revolution that we know as Impressionism. His vision, even as he began to lose his vision at the end of his life, really did, I think, bring cohesion to the movement as a whole. And I think Monet is, with the possible exception of Van Gogh, who's kind of an impressionist and kind of isn't, Monet is the one that I think that everybody is the most familiar with for a reason. And his water lilies are gorgeous. By the time he got to be an older man, he decided that his garden, he fell in love with his garden. In fact, he once said, "When I am dead, the greatest thing I will have left to the world is not his paintings, it would have been his garden," he said. So he had this beautiful way. He would go out into the garden he had all the willies, the willow trees, the pond, the water lilies, all that is actually in his backyard in Giverny, a beautiful, gorgeous garden. And he would just sit there, and he would just sort of sit there and watch the light play off the plants and the water. He was endlessly fascinated by the way the water and the light played off each other and the impressions it left us. Take a look at some of the pictures. There you can see the greens always, they're either the water lilies themselves or the hanging of the willow trees, the hanging of the leaves there and the branches that you can see. And you can just see how gorgeous it is. I mean, in the sense that the blues and the purples are always the color he uses to align with the dancing of the light off the water itself. You almost never see much of any of the garden, almost none of it you see, unless you see it like in this image, reflected back at you in the water itself. And you can see the level, you can see really, if you just focus your eyes on the circular flowers that you see on the left-hand side of the screen and across the top. If you just focus on them and kind of relax your eyes, you will almost see them floating. It's as if they're floating above the canvas, right? And so you have a level of depth to the water. And it's really interesting because what he does is he's able to create not just beautiful images of the light dancing and reflecting and bouncing off the water, but you also see, because of that light, deep into the reflecting pools themselves. Go to the next image. You can get a sense of it here too, right? I mean, that beautiful, almost ultramarine blue that you have at certain parts of the picture conveys a really sense of depth here and color, and that's what the Impressionists were really all about. And the interesting thing about him is, at the end of his life, he underwent cataract surgery. He was losing his eyesight, and that surgery was botched. It was a horrible procedure. He ended up losing his eyes eventually. But as oftentimes happens with this kind of cataract surgery, it transformed the way that he actually saw color. And so he was no longer able to see those beautiful blues and greens. He saw in terms of reds and yellows, which didn't really work he did do some water lily paintings in red and yellow, but they're not the same. And the old master ultimately died shortly thereafter. But if he had given us nothing else but the gift of these water lilies, it would be an endless testament to how we see, right? That's what painting's about. And in order to discuss how people see things, you need to be able to talk about light. We've talked about Caravaggio a lot on this show, and how for him light was best perceived in the contrast of darkness. Here you have a master, Monet, who sees light, but not as in the realistic, almost obviously literal way that we see light, but he looks at the effects of light and how it changes perception.
All right, as always, you can follow us on Facebook and Parler. And if you have a question for our Friday Q&A, visit freedomproject.com/askduke or send us a message on social media. Don't forget, the Dr. Duke Show is offered on more than a dozen podcast platforms, such as Apple, Stitcher, and Spotify. Simply subscribe and consider leaving us that coveted 5-star review to keep the show growing. Now let's wrap things up with our fun fact of the day. Because the water lily has its fragrant stomata on the upper side of its leaves, it is unlike most dry land plants. And also, I found out that the fleshy rhizomes on the water lily are commonly eaten by muskrats.
And don't forget the Captain and Tennille, muskrat love, baby. And that's going to do it for our show. For Freedom Project, I'm Dr. Duke. She's Katie. Until next time, stay educated, my friends.